I want to welcome you to this session, Working Together to Bring the Innovation Economy to Boston's Neighborhood Panel. Now, you're kind of lucky today. You're lucky because I can't sing. And because I just had my eyes dilated. However, I do remember enough about everybody who's up here that I can at least have that part of it. And I do have some questions that I want to ask, but we're going to make sure that by the time we're done today, you'll be able to have an exchange that allows you to ask some questions as well. They've also made these numbers very large on the clock. So I'll be watching our panelists to make sure we all stay within our time frame. As the title of this session indicates, economic development and innovation are collaborative affairs requiring collective efforts of many stakeholders to achieve success. I understand we've been talking about lots of wonderful collaborations all day. This is the formula for success to date in the city of Boston, and I anticipate that such will be true into the future. It certainly remains at the heart of our efforts at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary as the University of Massachusetts, Boston, with a history that goes back for generations. But our willingness to partner is something that we're very proud of. It's led to our recent Carnegie classification as a community engaged campus and over 900 district partnerships that are truly collaborative, but also the notion of reciprocity and the notion of being able to learn from each other and then to produce with each other is something that we're very proud of. We're also proud of our efforts in STEM education, both in terms of our advancement around gender equity and also cultural differences. And so, the success of this Commonwealth in the city of Boston rests heavily upon its ability to generate innovation, which produces wealth and also jobs. For the impact of wealth and the jobs in the region to be felt by all of our citizens, we have to find effective ways to spread innovation and development it brings to our neighborhoods. To that end, we have gathered today a distinguished panel of individuals that we're so glad to have here, and we're honored to have here together. And I'm just going to take a few moments to just introduce or just to let them know how much we appreciate their coming and being part of this today. First of all, our Chief of Economic Development for the great city of Boston, John Barros, is here with us. You can give him a round of applause. Now, you know, Chief Barros in this role focuses on fostering economic development in all of Boston's neighborhoods through marketing Boston on a national and an international scale, ensuring access to employment, pathways to careers, and strong job growth. He did not just show up. He's been doing this for a long time, serving as one of the youngest members ever to serve as a board member on one of our neighborhood development associations, and I'm so proud of him for that. He also is a graduate of Dartmouth College, and you can read more about all that he's done in the program. Ed Glaeser is here with us today. He's the Fred and Eleanor Glimp Professor of Economics in Harvard University's Faculty of Arts and Sciences, became the Rappaport Institute's faculty director in June 2004. He also is the former director of the Tubman Center for State and Local Government at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And he's someone who has edited and written quite a few books, all are mentioned. He's also a PhD graduate from the University of Chicago in economics, and he's here with us today. And yes, give him a round of applause. And first? No, I'm saying I'm not introducing you last. I'm introducing you first.
Got it.
Kathy, thank you for being here today with us. I had a chance to sit with you, talk earlier. She's executive director of our historic Boston Incorporated, HBI, a nonprofit organization that redevelops historic buildings in Boston's neighborhoods. Prior to that service, she was associate director of public affairs at Northeastern University, a place where I spent a lot of years, responsible for shaping and implementing the university's strategic effort to support neighborhood revitalization. She's also served as director of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Office of Small Business and Entrepreneurship. She's a native of Dover, New Hampshire. She received her BA in history from the University of New Hampshire, and she is also a MPA awardee from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. A lot of that going around today. And so I guess I'm going to be an honorary person today. So listen, I would like the panelists to come. We're going to start with Chief Barros to come and offer their remarks. Thank you so much.
All right. Good morning, right? It's still morning. Is it?
Morning somewhere.
No? I tell you, the day flies by. It's amazing. I've got an amazing job. And, Chancellor, I'm not sure who thought about the placement up here, but I guess I should start by saying we love our university partnerships.
Thank you.
Right, the City of Boston and Mayor Walsh, in fact, has set up city government to build on the success of partnerships. If you know our mayor, if you know Mayor Walsh, you know how important partnerships are. You know how important, in fact, relationships are. He has set up his administration to take advantage of the kind of resources that universities bring to the city. In fact, he's set up his administration to take advantage of the kind of partnerships, a number of different stakeholders and assets and resources that we have in the city of Boston, which is why he set up the Cabinet of Economic Development, so that the Chief of Economic Development, which I have the honor of being, can spend time thinking about the kind of efforts that can only be done through collaboration and partnerships, thinking about bringing people together and the resources together to Boston to move us forward together. And I want to talk a little bit about those things and specifically talk about where I think there are some key opportunities for the university community to do this. But we've been doing this, and in fact, I'm not going to steal his thunder, because he might show up and talk about the relationship with UMass Boston and the memo that was just signed this morning. Or he might
that we've been hanging out all day.
You guys have been hanging out, yeah. That's right. Or choose to speak, and I'm hoping Ed does, about the amazing work that we're doing together with the new Neighborhood Innovation District Committee. So there's a lot going on with universities right now. He also created a position that is unique in the country, which is the Chief of Education. And in the vision for the position for the Chief of Education, who is Ron Dorsey, is to help bring together all of Boston's education community, particularly the universities, right? Work with the universities to help maximize what we can do as a city that is rich with intellectual prowess in addressing some of the challenges of our city, but particularly in making sure that our K-12 system is the best that it can be, in working with our district schools, charter schools, private schools, parochial schools, and making sure that Mayor Walsh continues to be the mayor, not for some of the children of Boston, but for all of the children of Boston. And that's something we can only do with our university partners. But let me talk about 3 economic development priorities. And in those 3 economic development priorities, talk a little bit about university partnerships and maybe where we might find opportunities to do more. The first is really, if you heard the mayor's speech at the chamber breakfast, you will hear in his speech how he talks about Boston's economy, or the vision for Boston's economy being one that is, or for Boston altogether being a city that is healthy, thriving, and innovative. And as he explains that vision, he talks about an economy that continues to grow. He talks about a powerful economy that continues to grow within an equitable community, right? And we have an economist next to us that I'm sure can shed the light on the fact that what's threatening our community is the widening gap of inequity, right? Of the widening gap of income, of wealth. You can't have a city where, on average, we have a 5% unemployment rate, and yet you have certain parts of our city where it's well in the double digits, right? And it is a threat, but yet at the same time an opportunity. But it's the kind of opportunity that only we can do because we have university partners that can help us build bridge the skills gap, put people to work, answer the demand from the industries for talent, right? Bring talent to the workplace. And that is, in fact, our promise. It's our promise to the world, it's our promise to the region, that we have some of the brightest and the smartest and the most talented, and we have some folks who are not being the most productive they can be, right? And so how do we take that and take that opportunity to create clear pathways to work, right? And get people to fill some of the needs of our industry. How do we take that and really think about what the trends are in Boston, where in the last 10 years you've seen in the healthcare sector 32% job growth. At the same time in the manufacturing jobs you've seen 40% decline, right? How do we begin to think about who we need to train, how we train them, and allow me to go out and say, no, bring advanced manufacturing to Boston, the Boston area. Bring precision manufacturing to Boston, the Boston area, because we are training the kind of talent that you need, and we are the city that is going to be able to provide you with the kind of workforce that you need. If you talk to anyone leading any of the major corporations, they will tell you that the most important thing is talent, right? And Boston and this region's promise is stemmed on the university partnerships around the skills gap. Second priority, the mayor talks about the need to house all of Boston, right? Everyone in Boston should be able to find a way to be here. I sat down with a company a few months ago that told me they were leaving to Springfield. Love Springfield, but wanted to keep them. But they were leaving because it became too expensive for their employees. That's a problem. That is a problem, right? And so the need to house all of Boston's employees is something that we can't solve on our own. We need people to think with us about the models. We need people to think with us about how we finance it. We need to think with us collectively as a city about the ways that we can go about this differently, creating density where appropriate, creating height and scale where you can, particularly around transit nodes and how we can do this. That is, in fact, another opportunity for partnership. I've got 18 seconds. The last is, this clock is in your face. The last is...
I tried to block it.
Watch it go.
No, you did well. The last is really it's a geographic approach, right? Neighborhood, regional, international. I'll start with international. On the international front, there is nothing that brands better in the international scene than the universities, right? When you go out and you talk about the area, everybody, oh yeah, such and such cause. But the important thing is that they know someone who came here. You can't meet people anywhere who don't have ties to Boston because their wife or their partner or the child wants to, or whatever the case may be. I talked to 3 potential international investors who want to come here from China. And all 3 of them want to come because their child intends to come to school here. All 3. I hosted 2 already, right, who are looking at opportunities to provide capital to the area. That sounds very generous. Really important that we understand that. From a regional standpoint here, the universities anchor a lot of the regional partnerships that I've been talking to people about. We just launched the Life Science Corridor, which is a partnership between Somerville, Cambridge, Boston, Quincy, Braintree, along the Red Line. And along the Red Line are key university partners, such as UMass, MIT, Harvard, et cetera, who are working with us and will be working with us on the Life Science Corridor. It's important. And then in our neighborhoods, clearly, universities, and I speak to this not only as Chief of Economic Development today, but as former Executive Director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. where we were able to take advantage of the fact that there were some key universities in our neighborhood that ended up being important partners, Northeastern, where we archive our documents today, right? Which is a fabulous resource to have. So many ways to look at some of our economic priorities and find ways to work with universities to move them forward.
Ed?
Thank you. Thank you, John. You know, listening to John reminds me of one of the things I've learned most from my 10 years at the Rappaport Institute is that the reason why, as an academic, it's so rewarding to connect with the city is not that we have so much to teach the city, but that we have so much to learn from the city. And it has been a remarkable time for me to continue learning from you, from the city, from the people around us. It's great to be here in District Hall. This is what District Hall used to look like. This is what this space is. And in some sense, this space is symbolic of the transformation of Boston as a whole. The transformation of this erstwhile industrial town to this city of ideas. And this place, from a place where once all this density once enabled hogsheads to be put on clipper ships, now enables smart young programmers to communicate ideas with each other. This transformation of Boston has happened despite some rough periods, particularly in the 1970s, but it's happened primarily because of the skills that are the anchor of this metropolitan area. If there's one central fact about cities across the United States and across the world, it is that skills are destiny. Education is what determines the long-run success of people, of cities, of regions. This is the relationship between gross domestic product and skills across America's metropolitan areas. On average, as the share of adults in your metropolitan area with a college degree goes up by 10%, your earnings go up on average by 8%, holding your years of schooling constant. It just pays to have smart neighbors because they can teach you something, because they can give you a job, and certainly during the Great Recession, there was nothing that was more protective of unemployment, more likely to make unemployment less likely than to have skilled neighbors around you. Which is why it's unsurprising that skills have been so predictive of which areas have grown or not. If you want to understand why Seattle, and remember in 1971, two jokers put up a billboard on the highway leaving Seattle asking the last person to leave the city to please turn out the lights because Boeing had been cutting back on jobs. But if you want to understand why Seattle came back and Detroit did not, or has not yet, Barry. It will still. We're still hoping. You don't need to look further than the fact that 1/2 of Seattle's adults have college degrees, and 1 out of 8 of Detroit's adults have college degrees. Now, the skills that matter for urban growth are, of course, not just those that are taught in schools. They're above all the skills that are learned on city streets. And it's hard to think of any talent that is more important for the long-run success of an urban area than the inclination, the ability to be an entrepreneur, to find some new opportunity. 50 years ago, the economist Ben Chinitz was comparing New York and Pittsburgh and noting that New York appeared to be more resilient than Pittsburgh was even then. And he argued, of course, that this was a result of the legacy of the garment industry, which was a mother of entrepreneurship, a place where anyone with a few ideas and a couple of sewing machines could get started. Similar stories, of course, will be told about the software industry 30 years from now, where people who got started in a variety of small, nimble startups in places like District Hall then went on to do something else. It is amazing, given how mediocre our measures of entrepreneurship are, that they are so powerful in predicting urban success. This is just average establishment size, right? The places with lots of small establishments, those are those ones, have had much faster growth. And this is, of course, true within regions, within industries, and so forth. This is, in fact, when we started looking at this data 15 years ago, this was an area in which Boston's weakness was palpable. That, in fact, 15 years ago, Suffolk had the largest average establishment size of any major county in the United States. And, in fact, that, in some sense, a reflection of the fact that Boston's entrepreneurship was not where it should be, lay behind Mayor Menino's decision to make this one of his signature achievements. The Innovation District was very much built of an idea that Boston needed to have a more entrepreneurial ecosystem. And in one level, it is working absolutely splendidly. Of course, there are things that we need to remember about this. And I just put these two images up, that betting on entrepreneurship is always, of course, a roller coaster. And this is, Vannevar Bush, who reminds us, of course, of the central role that universities have played in Boston's success. Somewhat embarrassingly for me, of course, it's MIT far more than Harvard, which has been the central player. And of course, Vannevar Bush gave us Raytheon, as well as mentoring Fred Terman, who would go back to Stanford to form the Stanford Industrial Park. This was his industry, right? Raytheon, computer-related manufacturing. This is just normed, so one is 2003. Suffolk has almost essentially entirely lost its computer-related manufacturing. And Middlesex County has declined by 100%. by 50% in a few short years, right? This is this roller coaster. Now, this has been replaced by R&D in the sciences and so forth, but the industries are constantly changing. It is an unpredictable cauldron of new ideas that are going forth. It is a cauldron that is centered on a few clear clusters, and that in some sense is the background for what this neighborhood innovation district is about, right? One of the clusters is 128. You see the dark areas along the 128 corridor, and the other one is Kendall Square. And of course, the innovation district was built to be a third cluster. And in one sense, it has succeeded marvelously. This area is full of smart people with great ideas who are doing wonderful things, not just for Boston, but for the world. On the other hand, it is clear that there are two major challenges that the innovation district faces. It is too successful, and the space is too expensive, and it is not clear that it's doing a great job of reaching inside Boston's neighborhoods, of bringing success more widely. And that is very much what the Neighborhood Innovation District Committee, which is, I think, a classic example, John and I are co-chairing it, of relations, partnership between government and the university. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to design an innovation district that will, in fact, be in a central Boston neighborhood, that will provide opportunity more widely, that will provide innovation that can be expanded. So here are the major themes of our experiment, of our grand attempt to figure out something new. One, it must help community residents. I often say the right economic development strategies to attract and train smart people and then get out of their way. It's got to be about training people as well. This cannot be just about importing talent into a lower income area. It must be scalable. It must have innovations that can be brought everywhere if they work. This can't be about just bribing people to locate in a poor area. It has to be about constantly learning more. Ideas that have come up, one-stop permitting, a Devons for Dudley, as I've called it somewhere. Devons has had a one-stop permitting for 10 years, I think, or so, right? So something that makes it easy for anyone, whether or not they're starting a software company or a local grocery, to get a permit quickly. And so the information czars can actually watch how quickly those permits get out. So it's all centralized. Competitively sourced after-school vocational training, code for kids provided by people who actually know what they're doing. Mentoring. District Hall has great mentoring programs. I want to see that done in whatever this innovation district as well. And I think creative infrastructure and buses as well. So I love buses in part because they can be scaled up or down because they're easier for innovation. I also love things like shipping container retail in underutilized places. In the wake of Christchurch's in New Zealand's earthquake, cathedral was badly damaged, they put retail in shipping containers. It's fun, it's quirky. This is a way that Tony Hsieh is doing it in Vegas as well, and it's a way of leading not with expensive infrastructure projects, but with small-scale shops that are on a human scale and can be scaled up. So being creative about what works right in that particular area is important. And I want to just end by supporting what Chief Barros said about the need to build, because in fact, whatever happens, it can't just be about gentrification. It needs to be combined with a commitment to actually delivering housing in Boston, housing that can make sure that the city remains affordable. This is new data, and what I've done here is I've sorted metropolitan areas based on their mobility. Mobility means take kids in the bottom quarter of the income distribution and ask how they ended up. These ones are the places that did the best for the poor kids. These are the ones that did the worst for their poor kids. Along the y-axis is how restrictive the land use regulations are. So what this tells you is those areas that are best at turning poor children into middle-income adults also are most restrictive in how much building they get. The areas that are actually doing what we badly hope America can do, which is to provide more mobility, are zoning out the children who would come and take advantage of that. And Boston is one of those cities, and that is why the stakes are so high for the mayor to win this and to provide enough housing that can actually permit the transformation of the city and permit mobility for a wider group of people.
Kathy?
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Kottaridis, and it's a pleasure to be here. I work for Historic Boston Incorporated. We are a 55-year-old historic preservation organization that redevelops historic buildings in the city, repositioning them for new uses in today's Boston. We are tactical, we are project-oriented, we're bricks and mortar. So I'm bringing you right down to the ground today, or at least at this very moment. It seems probably a little odd to have somebody with the word history in their title somewhere on a panel that's going to be talking about the innovation economy, but the reality is that Historic Boston, in order to work in the world of real estate in Boston, needs to be thinking all the time about how it's supporting a growing city. And preservation of historic buildings and repositioning them has got to be looking in that direction. Not only that, it's important always in real estate to have a use for your properties. And one of the things that we're always thinking about is what is up and coming and what is needed in the city and predominantly in the neighborhoods of the city for uses that will support continued maintenance and investment in the neighborhoods, particularly in historic buildings. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about partnerships. We believe historic preservation is economic and community development, but we also know that it appeals very much to neighborhood pride, and it also very much is tied to that intangible thing called cool neighborhoods. You know, the places where people want to go and hang out because of scale of building, because of the type of the structures, density, and such. We think we're part of that, but we are also equally respectful in looking at properties, not just facing the people who may come into Boston's neighborhoods and take advantage of their transit connections and such, but we're also looking at the people who are there now and trying to make sure that the properties that we redevelop and that we invest in are manageable for them as well, so that retention is also key. I have a couple of projects that...
Clicker.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. A couple of projects to highlight today that really illustrate the places where we intersect with partners. We partner with a lot of people. We partner with the City of Boston, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We partner with other nonprofit organizations for a variety of different reasons. And we partner with for-profit developers and property owners, whoever we need to connect with. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about how we partner with educational and research institutions on some of our projects, just by example, because we do rely very much on opportunities to take advantage of, as a small nonprofit organization of 3 people, we really are looking to figure out how to leverage what we know and what we have, but also what else is out there to support our work. So I start out today by showing you a project that we recently completed about a year ago, the Hayden Building in Chinatown. It's a property that for many years was in a high degree of distress, has been empty in the upper floors for more than 30 years. And we recently, in the past couple of years, repositioned it for 4 units of housing. But in the process of doing that, for a property that's small, that is also very expensive because of the level of deterioration, we had to really think hard about about being economic about the way in which we pursued our reuse of this property. We knew that we wanted to do housing, we knew we wanted to do market rate rental, and we also knew that we wanted to fit these properties or the units out at a very high level. But in the course of carrying out this sort of work, we really had questions about the kind of amenities that young people, our target audience here was the 30-something professional crowd, what they really wanted in the way of amenities. So the question we brought to the MIT Center for Real Estate was, how does one measure the priorities for the kinds of amenities that go into rental housing, the degree of build out that we need to do that will ultimately be cost effective in the course of construction, but in the long term return what we expect and can sustain the pricing that we're looking for in the rental units. They were great in helping us to think about forming a methodology for determining that and basically measuring through focus groups and through other types of data analysis what priority we would want. So the questions were, you know, should you build a roof deck? Do 30-somethings need that, or do they really want wet bars in the living room? That was actually one of them. So, and I throw that out there because thankfully the wet bar fell ahead of the roof deck and we were able to remove the roof deck from the scope of work. And it saved us. I mean, it justified our choice of taking $200,000 out of the roof construction budget so that we could actually keep our costs within reason. But that's just one example of the way in which data and a very systematic analysis of market information can help a small nonprofit move something forward that is working very, very well, fully leased up, and also meeting all of its pricing expectations. Probably hard for you to see this slide, but moving on to Fields Corner, where we have a partnership with Fields Corner Main Street to help bring preservation services and real estate projects to the Main Street program there. we, over the last 5 or so years, have been looking for opportunities to address buildings there. And we teamed up with MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning, DUSP, on an overall district analysis right when we were starting our partnership, so that we could ask them to do some of the data analysis and also do some initial conceptual design and planning around historic buildings in the radius of the Fields Corner T station. So what you're really looking at are some initial mapping that they did of transit directions and also number of trips back and forth through the district. So that was very helpful to us in helping to understand what we should be looking for and making recommendations for how we might address buildings like this. And you'll see here a couple of a drawing in response to how we might activate the upper floors of this small building and how we might change the exterior and also bring it up to a level of systems that actually support contemporary needs of both retail and upper story uses. And the students were able to do the design, and they were able to do the financial analysis at an essential feasibility level to help us begin to make some decisions. And we ultimately went in the direction of doing some of the work that they recommended, and with the market studies of the for upper story uses. They also provided historical research on some buildings that had been sort of changed over time and that were very hard for us to understand in the way of physical makeup, and some conceptual planning that we ultimately went to work on, and in this case changed an 1895 building to more of what it in fact looked like originally, but at the same time completely upgraded systems and recrafted and restructured all the leases within the building, so that a preservation project was also upgrading this building to a higher level of performance. And they also did projects like this that took a really difficult building in the center of Fields Corner, a former theater, and showed us what it would look like if it had been modified and ultimately brought back to some manifestation of what it once was. And suddenly you have a very new view of a place that is right now just a very solid wall. And for Historic Boston, this is a project that we continue to talk to the owner and try to craft a project around. And finally, we've been, for some time, we received a challenge grant to put together a partnership between Historic Boston and North Bennett Street School in trying to figure out the ways in which we could use funding to acquire and invest in historic buildings, frame buildings that North Bennett Street School is particularly skilled at doing. And by teaming up with them, but also going to the Center for Real Estate again at MIT, we were able to put together a revolving investment fund to acquire some level of control of properties like what you see in Dorchester, make the investments necessary to turn them around and sell them, and in this case to a first-time homeowner, and take the proceeds from that and move it into a new project. And I'm pleased to report that we recently acquired interest in a 1786 farmhouse in Mattapan that was abandoned that we're very excited about getting into, using this kind of multi-level partnership. So I'll leave it at that, but just to say this is obviously value add to a small nonprofit, but if I were to conclude anything, I would just say that one of the things that we firmly believe in is that whatever we undertake in partnership with either a student, a class, or an institution has to be supporting one of our chief priorities or one of our chief objectives. We like everything to be mutual, but at the end of the day, I think it's very important for us to be trying to be a good client, but also foster good consultants in student projects.
So, Kathy, I hope you noticed that even though that red light was flashing,
oh, well.
that I left you alone, because when you see this tall guy is going to be following you around. He has this historic building project just waiting.
I hear you have a couple.
Got a couple of them. So don't call the police or anything like that. It's just me. So remember, I gave you 2 minutes and 3 seconds or something. Okay?
I see 25 down there.
Oh, I'm going to give you 25 if you want it. Listen, so thank you all for your comments and for the wonderful points that you've made so far. When you think about economic development and questions related to that, what are some of the questions that you think about where academic partners are needed? Are there some more other than the ones that you've identified that we should be aware of? Talking to anyone on the panel.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think we received a wonderful presentation the other day from a group of students working with us on a project, and it raised a number of different questions. One of the questions we need to look at is how we spend public dollars and when we spend them, what the return is.
Right.
Right? We looked at this presentation that showed that Boston's capital budget was lower than most cities our size. Right? So we invest less in capital infrastructure build-up. So the question was, so if we were to invest more, if we were to build out some cycle tracks, what would that do to the local economy? Right? It's a question that I have, right? Those are the kinds of things, and so the tax dollars to return kind of questions that, I can sit there all day and think about and wish I had an answer to, but university partners can help us figure out, right? Really, really important. The second is we're trying to create an opportunity in Dudley Square where we've asked someone to come in and run an incubator or an innovative center, an accelerator, or something that helps put that neighborhood within the innovation economy and begin to look at creating an innovation district and what it takes to get the right ecology to help support taking ideas to industry. But one of the things that I know is really, really important in doing that is just having conversations that spark new thoughts, right? And I don't think we do enough of that in all of our neighborhoods. It's amazing what we find in the halls, right, in the towers. But take some of that disruptive thinking and bring that to our neighborhoods, right? Move your classrooms out into the space where the ordinary Boston citizen can hear from people who are thinking along some of the things that we, might not have had an opportunity to really sort of dive into. And then third and last, the research agenda or the data agenda, and it needs to become a learning agenda with our city, right? That we need to help infuse in conversations all over the city the use of information and data, so that when we are talking about gentrification, something you mentioned, which is something that I think people throw around a lot, but we never really bring information or data to, right? To look at trends and look at what's happening. So in some neighborhoods, I'll have a conversation about gentrification, and in one side of the room, in one conversation, they'll say, we've got to make sure that we're not gentrifying Boston's neighborhoods. And they'll say, and we have too much affordable housing. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult sometimes to have conversations with competing interests without information, data, trends, maps, right? Because all you're doing is then kind of shooting from your experience, your anecdotal vantage point. And I think we need to inject more information, data into these conversations so that we can actually lift up, which is something the Walsh administration really wants to do, lift up civic engagement, lift up the civic conversation, the civic dialogue in a way that it's informed and then we can move together.
Yeah, naturally, I couldn't agree more with all three of those points, both the classroom in the city, the incredible advantages to both academics and hopefully the city as well by partnering on data issues. And of course, I want to particularly give a shout out, I believe the expression is forward to the value of cost-benefit analysis and the role of the city in furthering that. I want to throw out actually what I think is the largest unanswered public policy question, and that's one of the reasons why I'm excited by the Neighborhood Innovation District, is I think in fact some of the innovations can be about trying to solve this thing. We have many public policy problems that are pressing in this country, how to improve urban schools being very high up on my list, and we have a robust academic ecosystem that is involved in investigating that. But one fact keeps on going over and over in my head. When I was born in 1967, 1 in 20 prime-aged males was jobless, 5%, had been so for the 20 years prior to that as well. Today, that number is almost 17%, right? That's a secular trend. It's been more than tripling. It's not just about the Great Recession and its aftermath. Every recession, that number goes up, and then it goes down slightly. This is a huge issue. Almost 1 in 5 now, prime-age males jobless. Long-term joblessness is also an issue among women as well, although it's a little bit harder to tease out of the data. Figuring out how to address that issue of long-term joblessness, especially for people who have unfortunately passed the age in which you can say, well, the answer is universal pre-K. That's harder to know how that helps a 43-year-old on this. Not to say I'm not in favor of universal pre-K, but it's, and we just don't know how to do it. We just don't have the answer for fixing this. And to me, at least, that's an area in which every public official should be worried about this. Every academic should be worried about this. And this is a question in which I hope we can continue to try and find better solutions and test those solutions.
Well, I suppose if I have anything to add as a nonprofit is, I think it's always valuable to a nonprofit, and the hardest thing to quantify is impact of what you're doing, and collecting the data and managing the data and all of the things that are probably fairly rote work. But I would, just for the purposes of this conversation, say that I think that one of the hardest things too is the cross-sector management of information and policy planning, so that there is the level of building the level of collaboration that needs to take place across different types of organizations and I imagine with different levels of academic research.
So why don't we just stay with that for a moment, and let's talk about some of the shortcomings to those fruitful relationships. What are some of those, and how should we deal with that? Since someone's probably going to ask that question out here anyway, I might as well ask it.
The practical ones are probably related to time and networks, and I think where you plug in to which network and which public policy center and all of those kinds of things. And I think there's some great work going on in terms of the collaborations around research around Greater Boston, but I do think there's opportunities there to build stronger networks with organizations like mine, which you would never expect to be part of a conversation about housing or a conversation about jobs. And yet, what do we do but build things and employ people to do it?
I would challenge us as a city to find ways to have real long-term partnerships and do real longitudinal studies that are complex, right? So, and I know every time I get into a partnership with a university, we try to narrow down those questions in a way that we can manage the time it takes us to answer those questions and manage sort of the other questions that come
Is
after.
that a nice way of saying we sort of reflect on things for a long time? Is that
No. I'd like to reflect on things for a longer period of time, right? So I'd like to reflect on this. So there were some studies that looked at for every, what are you getting from a return standpoint for every dollar you spend on early childhood education, right? And it showed the Federal Reserve Bank and in Indianapolis, I think, did this, and it showed that for every dollar you spend on early education, you're getting a $17 return, right? On not having to spend on services for around mitigation and some other things by the time someone is in their teens, right? We're not following enough of those kinds of projects together as a city. We, because so many of the relationships are based on individuals, right, back and forth. And so I just want to challenge us to think about longer-term projects together that are dynamic, that really sort of ask cross-sectoral questions, right, and look at these things together. And I think the university can play the role of data holder, data warehouse, if you would, where I think, can trust the universities to hold sets of data from different sources so that we can be able to pull on them and have a conversation publicly that's more dynamic, right? And I ask our universities to think about how to do that, warehouse data and allow us to access them. And I know some people have been thinking about that, but for long-term projects that look at cost-benefit analysis so that you can make that leap, right, around how we impact people from a generational standpoint.
There are two reasons why long-term relationships are so valuable, one of which is that they build trust, which is huge. But the second of which is it is crucial for bridging the incredible gulf that separates an academic worldview from the worldview of an actual practitioner who has real responsibilities for stuff every day. And if they don't happen to get their book done this year, it becomes a real issue for them. Whereas it might not be such an issue for you that you've delayed for another 6 months your thing. You're not allowed to do that with clearing away the snow. I was waiting till I was on sabbatical to clear the snow, so maybe we could just hold off on that. On top of this, there's of course a very different sensitivity to just the degree of constraints that you face. I mean, academics are typically relatively free in what they're allowed to do, at least with their own lives. Practitioners, leaders face enormous constraints, both from the community and from the political process, right? So it's wonderful as an academic to say, well, if I get involved in public policy, I really expect the practitioner to actually listen to what I'm telling them and act accordingly. But that's a completely unrealistic expectation given the constraints that the best you can hope is that you've mildly informed their worldview, and in the longer run help them to make better decisions, one hopes. And also I think to go into it with a view that, look, maybe you'll make a difference, but at the very least, you will learn something about how the world works, about how cities work, and that will be your most immediate and most pressing payoff.
So suddenly this clock has jumped down to about 6 minutes from about 15 minutes. That must mean that the mayor is somewhere in to the space. But I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. Hands and questions that you may have. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Bridget Wallace. I'm an urban planner from Tufts. I work for the state, live in Roxbury. And this entire morning and afternoon, we've been talking about data and its importance. And we know that the city wants to use data to drive change and for us to take action. But other questions come to mind, such as, are we talking to others about what we don't know so that we can ask them what we have missed and how the city is looking at that and addressing that? In terms of analyzing what we've learned, are we analyzing the data with some skepticism to identify what the gaps are? And then the other question that comes to mind for me is, whose perspective does this information represent, right? Whose perspectives is it not representing? And then, John, as you mentioned, talking about a case in point, looking at Roxbury and the tension and the struggle that's happening there in Roxbury with gentrification, and we know we have the lion's share of affordable housing there, but what the community and the stakeholders and the leaders there did not sort of take into account, and I think they didn't have the right partnerships, was the market forces that will quickly drive gentrification, right? So when you have developers that could come in and buy up properties and apartments and quickly drive rents, that would quickly offset what we have as affordable housing and raise it so that we're moving it into a direction of gentrification. And the people that have been charged with, like the Roxbury Master Plan Oversight Committee, to address these things didn't really have that information so that we could make a more informed decision about community and economic development and community planning and development.
So you and I agree, Bridget. I'll hit a couple points. What the innovation district did in Seaport, right? It threatens to do in Roxbury again, right? So with development comes higher value of land, right? With improvements, with more accessibility and more opportunities comes higher value of land, which is why, in fact, part of the conversation with the neighborhood innovation district is, how do you begin to not say we're not going to develop, right? Because too many of our communities are saying, we're scared, but we're going to develop without displacement. We're going to develop with an equitable lens. We're going to develop and really talk about the affordable housing structures that are needed, the affordable commercial space that are needed, what we're doing with the Ferdinand in terms of how we bring people in and place them give them a position to play in this economy. I think that's the lens that I referred to in the beginning when I talked about the mayor's speech. But those are the questions we need to ask. You said exactly what I said. We can't do it without data and information. We have to understand what that means. We had a presentation that looked at the increase in real estate value for every dollar you put into public school facilities. Fascinating, right? How are we thinking about that? How are we thinking about capturing that value, right? How are we thinking about making that part of the community benefits where we improve a community and some of that value goes back into the community, right? Great questions, but we can't do it, and this is where the university partnerships come into play. We can't do that without data and information, which is why that is the promise for developing these districts with more informed conversation.
I just want to highlight one thing about the Neighborhood Innovation District Committee, that this has been throughout a grassroots bottom-up process. The very idea came out of a town hall at Roxbury Community College. It came from the community, and it was the most popular ideas elected by the community. The entire process has been filled with, Steve Boftak and Kate going through a community listening tour of listening to anyone who would, come into the library and give their ideas. So this has very much been an attempt to make sure that those voices that are not always heard are in fact heard, and that's really part of the dream of the committee.
So maybe there needs to be a session like this that's in Bridget's neighborhood in Roxbury that's focused on exactly what you're asking about, but bring these minds right to the people who need to hear it so they can make decisions about their own neighborhood.
Let's put our hands together for this wonderful panel. So it's my honor to introduce our next speaker, the Honorable Mayor of Boston, Martin J. Walsh. Now, you know that it was about a year ago that our mayor was sworn in as the city's 54th mayor on January 6, 2014. Mayor Walsh also had another milestone in his life when in April 1997, at the wonderful age of 29, he was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, representing the 13th Suffolk District in Boston. During his 16 years in the House, Mayor Walsh established himself as a leader on creating and protecting jobs, growing the economy. He authored landmark public construction law reforms that increase flexibility and accountability, help pass transit-oriented, mixed-use, smart growth district legislation, and was a strong supporter of infrastructure and zoning improvements. Mayor Walsh has long been an aggressive advocate for strong public schools. In the legislature, he fought for annual funding for alternative schools and helped pass a law that allows the city to transform underperforming schools into pilot, magnet, and in-district charter schools. A champion for civil rights, Mayor Walsh was a vocal early advocate for marriage equality, and he compiled a strong record in support of communities of color, immigration, seniors, and all the people of our state and of our city. He has also become known as the State House leader on substance abuse and recovery issues, and he's brought all of that to City Hall. Please join me in welcoming our mayor, the Honorable Martin J. Walsh. Mayor Walsh.
Thank you. You know, Boston's entering into a very unique time when it comes to where we're going to go. And throughout this first year, being the mayor of the city of Boston, you think about, everyone's asking, what's the vision, how are you going to move forward, and a lot of things get thrown at you at a lot of different times. And I spent the first few months being going from being a state representative to mayor of Boston, and there's somewhat of a transformation there, and there's a little bit of a learning curve going from a policymaker to an executive. So that's one of the things that we did. And also, when you sit down and think about Boston, and there's been an awful lot of talk about 21st century Boston, and I started to think back in history about the 20th century. And the 20th century really didn't come into its own until about 1914. And I thought about, Boston really, what I want Boston to be is the first 21st century city. And this is about the time when we start to define that. Because as the turn of the century, we start to talk about really where are we going as a city, where are we going as a country, where are we going as a world in a lot of ways. And we're looking at how do we continue to improve Boston. We look at the different policies. We're using data a lot more. In my office, I have a data dashboard. It wasn't there a year ago. It wasn't there for back to the beginning of Boston. It's there today. Why is it there? Because the key metrics that we're talking about. Some of the questions that are on the wall here about what's going to be asked of me today. You know, when we talk about homelessness, and we talk about housing, we talk about permitting, it's not only easy talking about, and I can give you an answer you might like and say, this is great, I'm glad you're moving forward. We're tracking our progress on the wall, and that's very, very important for us. We talk about development. How are we doing in development? We're tracking it on the wall, meaning I have it in my office saying, okay, this is where we're going, and we're looking, how do we grow as a city? How do we grow as a city, not just with economic development, and not just with housing, but making sure that we are able to have a city that has a middle class and make sure we can, as a city, we can move forward. All the initiatives that we're pushing forth this year is about how do we make ourselves a healthy, innovative city for the 21st century, and how do we continue to grow our city. This building here is unique because when this building was built or being discussed, no one really knew what was going to happen here. This is probably, in my opinion, one of the most exciting spaces in Boston because as you leave, a new group comes in today about something completely, totally different. And it's a space that in the Innovation District that truly is what's innovation every day and continually changes. Now, there's a lot of great businesses down here in the Innovation District, and we talk about the innovation, but this space changes because great minds and young minds and old minds and everyone's minds comes together and talks about a whole bunch of different things. So I'm going to stop talking there because I think really there's probably a few questions that people want to ask me. But I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for having these conversations because as you notice, when I say my team, there's a lot of people that presented here today, but there's also a lot of people that work in City Hall here today. And you might not think it, but you might say, well, politics isn't for me and no one's going to listen to me. You're talking about ideas today that somebody from my team is here listening to. They will take it back. The urban mechanics are here, and I guarantee you we'll have a conversation back there saying, somebody brought up a discussion around this. Somebody brought up a discussion. Maybe we can attack the homeless issue with this. Maybe we can talk about what's the next future, what's the next innovation in Boston. So thank you for participating here today, and I look forward to getting into a conversation. Well, let me take a question off the board here. What's the city doing about increasing number of homeless people? That's a difficult question. Because as you read in the newspaper over the last couple, actually today in both papers, I believe, and in the State House News Service, they spoke about the growing number of the homeless population in the city of Boston. And when you think about the reasons for it, they gave some reasons for it because of the economy, but also a lot of people come to Boston because of the services that are here. And I've been sitting at a lot of tables because of what happened with Long Island Bridge, where we had to make a decision to close it down, and having a conversation. What Long Island Bridge did, closing down Long Island Bridge for me was a very difficult decision. And we're working on temporary shelters, and we're going to be hopefully be able to talk a little more about that as we move forward very soon. But it also gave me an opportunity to say, okay, how do we deliver services in the city of Boston to homeless people? And how are we in the city of Boston as a shelter looking to end homelessness in the city of Boston? And I was able to bring in providers like Pine Street Inn to sit in our office and say to us, listen, this is what we do. We get people into our shelter, and then we try to help the people in our shelter and try to help them, give them the job skills they need or the workforce training they need or something they need to get them back on their feet and get them into housing. What the city of Boston does is basically we bring people into our shelter to make sure they have a warm place to stay on a particular night, give them something to eat, allow them an opportunity to take a shower, allow them an opportunity to store their belongings, and then they leave the next morning, and then the following night they come back again. And that's what we do in the city of Boston, and there's really no program around that. And what our job now really is now thinking about Long Island Bridge being closed down, I'm looking as an opportunity for us to really have a really good conversation internally to talk about how do we deal with homelessness in the city of Boston. Some of the homelessness is happening is drug addiction, alcoholism. That's an issue of being able to get people into a detox and get them into a detox, get them on a path to recovery. That ends homelessness. We have some cases where there's mental illness, where it's a little bit more difficult, a little more challenging that we have to figure our way through. And also there's other places as far as resources. You know, people don't want a homeless shelter in their backyard. People don't want housing in their neighborhood. We have to figure ways of creating more housing so people have places to live. The reason why our numbers are growing, I think, in some reasons, is because we have programs here. And I think the fact that the reason why we have increased numbers now, I think people are paying attention to it. I think when Long Island Bridge was there, no one was paying attention to it. All of a sudden, Long Island Bridge closed. Everyone's like, oh my God, we have all these homeless people. They were there the day before the bridge closed. And now it's an opportunity for us to really take a good look at it.
So what infrastructure project or projects can we use to leverage the creation of more green spaces in the city of Boston?
One is Starrow Drive. In Starrow Drive right now, right by Mass Eye and Air, there's a real great conversation going on about reconstructing the road around there, building a parking garage underneath so the parking garage could be used for Mass Eye and Air and their expansion. In that conversation, they're talking about moving the roadway over to add more land use to the esplanade, which creates more opportunities, allows opportunities to come up with a better infrastructure and design for a roadway. Right now, you have kind of 4 lanes going everywhere. It would limit us down to 2 or 3 lanes, so we'd be able to do better infrastructure. And that's one program that we're looking at doing. That's right on the front line here. Another one is that we're looking in the city of Boston, and we're beginning the conversation, we haven't done it yet, of a master transportation plan around the city of Boston. And I think when we look at those plans, it's not just about green space, it's also about creating proper bike lanes, proper bicycle tracks, proper pedestrian crossings, proper signalization. I think that those conversations have to happen in the city of Boston and beyond, in the region as well, and we're looking regionally. But those are conversations, and I didn't talk about it here, somebody might have mentioned it earlier, our housing plan to increase housing by 53,000 units by the year 2030 will add to the population to about 700,000 people, which means that more people need to get around. In order for them to get around, we have to look at our infrastructure to see, is there an opportunity for us, and what's that infrastructure going to be? Part of it's going to be roads, because people drive. Part of it's going to be bicycles, because people ride bikes, and that number's increasing every day. Some of it's going to be walking. You know, we're not really a walking city. People go to New York and they walk 50 blocks to just tour around. We don't do that here. We think it's like miles away, and it's really a smaller city than Manhattan. And then also public transportation. So I think there's an opportunity as we talk about what's the transportation system going to look like in the future, we start to build into those other things, more green space, if we can, bikes, people, cars, public transportation. That's how we do it.
Thank you so much for coming today. I think throughout the course of the conference, we really discussed how so many social policy problems are interrelated, but there's huge issues of capacity. So for you, what do you think is the most important social policy problem that you would like to focus on?
There's not one. You can't focus on one without looking at them all. It's difficult. And in the role, you know, when I talk about, when I think about my role as mayor of the city of Boston, it's a little different than a policymaker. And what I'd like to do is do some social policy issues on the city level that the state can model after me. You know, being a legislator, you know, the state took a good look at, we'll give you one example, homelessness. A couple of years ago, they had a committee to end homelessness. I was a representative at the time, so I'm going back to that time. I don't think that issue was addressed properly. We address families a little bit more in that. One of the ways we address families is by allowing families to be put in motels, which became a problem in itself. We got people off the street, but put them in motels, it created more problems. We really didn't deal with individual single homelessness in the city of Boston. That number went up, in the state it went up. So I think we have to look at our social policy as a whole around the Commonwealth and address this. This isn't just a Boston problem. It's also a Worcester problem, Quincy problem, Springfield problem, Pittsfield problem, and it's a regional problem. So we have to look at how do we deal with it on a state level. I'm not passing the buck. What I'm saying is the city is going to look at a lot of these policies. We're going to deal with a lot of them, but I think the state has to really help us here with some of this stuff.
Mayor,
Mr. Mayor, you have a lot of university researchers here from many of the universities here in Boston, and I'm sure there are all kinds of ways we're going to be able to help your administration. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what role you think the universities in and around Boston should be playing beyond the research we can help you with.
Yeah, I'll tell you, first of all, how important I think the universities are. As I was putting my cabinet together, we started talking, you know, we had Joyce Lenahan, Chief of Policy, John Barros, Chief of Economic Development. I'm sure there was some, Yasha Franklin Hodges here as well. So we started thinking about education. And in the city of Boston, we were saying, okay, as mayor of the city of Boston, my role and responsibility is really the Boston Public Schools. But in Boston, we have charter schools, which the kids that go to charter schools live in the city of Boston, their families, I represent their families. We have young people and people that go to school in Boston also that go to private schools, and I represent them as well. So we started to think a little differently. What can we do that really creates something here in the City Hall that makes a connection to the mayor's office and the cabinet? And the idea came out of Chief of Education. And it's Ron Dorsey. I don't know if Ron was here today at all just talking, but Ron Dorsey is the Chief of Education. So under his kind of umbrella is the Boston Public School System. He doesn't oversee them, but it's part of his cabinet. Charter schools, private schools, college universities. allowing college universities to have that conduit to the mayor's office. And I think that in the past, the relationship has been around economic development, maybe the BRA, any different colleges, you'd have a relationship with the BRA because you want a master plan or build a dorm or build a building. That's your connection to the city government. Today, the connection to city government is through the chief of education. So what the role, I think, and the reason why it's there, I think the role of college universities in this city are very, very important. I don't think, two things, I don't think people understand the relationship already of the universities and the colleges with our system here. I don't think that story is being told. And I think there's an opportunity right now to capitalize more on those relationships, whether it's a conversation like this, or whether it's a mentoring program, or whether it's a job program, or whatever the issue might be. So I think it's very, very important, particularly when you have the greatest, arguably the greatest college universities in the world right here in the city of Boston. Yeah.
Hi, Marty. Bill Gormley from Economy and from the Ben Franklin Institute. Thanks again for being our graduation speaker. It was a terrific day for the students. In thinking further on Barry's question, pushing it out to think about community colleges and universities, Yasha and John both referred to your goal of reducing by 50% the number of to increase by 50% the number of on-campus housing?
Actually, 16,000 beds by the year 2030.
Okay.
16,000 additional beds on campus. And in our housing plan, there's 4 components of the housing plan, and I'll just quickly go through them, and you probably know it already, some of you have already talked about it. But when we talk about housing in Boston, one of the first things that people complain about, and a lot of heads are going to nod in a minute, is workforce housing. Young people that live in the city, that go to college, come here, they can't stay here because they can't afford. You can live here if there's 3 or 4 of you in an apartment, and then when you want to go on your own, you can't afford it. So in that plan, and I think there's a question up here similar to it, we're looking at workforce housing. People earn between roughly $50,000, maybe a little less, and $150,000 in that area. You're not ready to buy a house yet, and you really want to stay in the city. Our plan is built to help create that type of housing. The second piece of housing is with the federal government funds drying up and less money going into housing, we are going to have an affordable housing problem down the road if we don't continue to build affordable housing. So part of our plan is continuing to build affordable housing in the city of Boston and continuing that creation. Don't say we have enough now, we're going to go middle class. We got to continue to create supportive housing for families that need it. Another piece of that housing is a third of our population is going to, in the next 10 years, going to be 65 and older. And we need to make sure that we have housing and good housing stock for those folks as well. So we're looking at how do we create senior elderly housing in the city of Boston. For-profit senior elderly housing. It's starting to become a trend. What happens there is when seniors want to live in an environment with other seniors, they eventually will sell their home, and their home goes back on the market for other families, but it gives them the opportunity to live in a safe environment where it's somewhat, I don't want to say protected, but there's a potentially to have some supports around those housings. And the last piece is around college universities, asking college universities to build 16,000 beds on campus or off-campus dormitory-style bedrooms. What that will do, if that goal is accomplished, and a lot of colleges and universities want to do it, will free up about 5,300 housing units in the city of Boston that young people are renting now off-campus in areas like Alston, Brighton, Dorchester, Mission Hill, and other parts of the city. So those 4 components really creates, not only does it create new housing stock, it also frees up housing stock in the neighborhood. So we're able to get to our number where we want to get to. Down the back, a couple questions.
About, sorry, thank you. About the creation of the diversity chief,
Yeah.
And what your thoughts are around that, and the outcome or impact of that.
Oh yeah, we're really excited about that. That is an issue that was discussed when I say an issue, the issue of diversity was discussed an awful lot during the campaign for mayor, in the fact that Boston is 54% people of color, and the city leadership in the city hall didn't reflect that. In the case of the police department, leadership of the police department didn't reflect that. In the business community, doesn't reflect that. On boards and commissions in the city, doesn't reflect that. So it's an issue of how do we have 54% people of color that live in the city of Boston, yet it doesn't reflect that in the workforce. So we started talking about how do we do a better job inside City Hall, and how do we create an opportunity for us to really make our mark. So we hired a gentleman by the name of Sean Blue. I don't know if Sean was here today. Sean Blue, who is the Chief Diversity Officer in the City of Boston, comes from New York City, did this for companies. This was his job, diversifying workforces. Teamed him up with Frida Bransfield, who is a City of Boston, lifelong City of Boston, Roxbury, Mattapan resident, who worked her way through City Hall. An opportunity for them to really create some real changes in city government, looking at the workforce that we have, working on recruiting people to come work for the City of Boston, looking at our boards and commissions in the City of Boston, and also so that we, me as mayor, go out and talk to people and say, put challenge out to the business community. I have to make sure our own house is in order first. I don't want to say to somebody, well, you have to do this. Well, what about you? Your numbers aren't there yet. So that's kind of where we're going with the Chief Diversity Officer, one of the roles of the team. And I think that's important. We've done some of it already, though. When you look at what we've done with the police department, 50% of the deputies in the police department, of the command staff, are people of color and women. People of color, and then I don't have all the breakdown of the number, but 50% of people of color, and then I think we have 3 or 4 women as well out of the 12, and so we're heading that way. My cabinet, I think we're at almost 40% people of color in the cabinet. So we're working towards making sure that when we talk about diversity in city government, it's not just diversity where I can say, oh, I have 50% people of color in my cabinet, and the workforce doesn't reflect that. We have to make sure it goes from the top to the bottom, or from the bottom to the top, however you want to call it. So that's where we're headed with that initiative. Excited about it. Yeah, Jason's coming with the microphone.
Janice Griffith, Suffolk University Law School.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned the connection between providing housing and transportation, and you have to look at land use, transportation in order to accomplish your housing goals. Mm-hmm. Transportation is basically done on a regional basis. And Boston is somewhat hampered. We have sort of fragmented local governments here, a lot of different local governments in our metropolitan region. What kind of regional initiatives do you think are necessary in order to accomplish some of the goals that you've set out? And how would you go about creating these regional initiatives?
Great question. From day one, we started to talk about regionalization when it comes to economic development in the City of Boston. When I say that, I've been partnering with Cambridge and Somerville, with Quincy and Braintree on the Red Line Corridor, the Life Science Corridor, we're calling it. We've been talking with the Metro Mayor's Council of the 13 or so mayors around the City of Boston about supporting each other on infrastructure projects. For example, the Green Line money that just came down, $400 million, none of it comes to Boston. It all goes to Medford, Malden, all the different areas. I am 100% supportive of that. I'm 100% supportive of them getting the money. If they want me to advocate for them at the State House, I will. If they want me to go to Washington, when I go to Washington, advocate for them, I absolutely will. Because none of that money is going to be spent in the City of Boston. But what it does, it connects the Green Line to the City of Boston. So the people that are going to be on the trains coming into work in Boston, or the people going back, living home, however it works, or people from Boston going to work in those cities and towns, it's important for us to support, whether it's transportation, infrastructure, economic development, and eventually we have to get around to the conversation around housing as well, around regionalization. If we want to bring an industry to this region, we need to do it regionally. It can't just be Boston. It can't just be Somerville or Cambridge. If we're competing with San Francisco, we're competing with New York, competing with all these other venues for jobs in different industries, we're taking a regional approach. It'll benefit Boston. People said to me in the very beginning, well, you're the mayor of Boston, you're not the mayor of Cambridge. I know I'm not the mayor of Cambridge. But if we create a new industry to come into this region, Boston's going to get its fair share. Yes?
You took the step of consolidating management over your human services and your public health department with a sort of a senior leader. Is there what's your vision for that expanded leadership, and is there an opportunity for those people to be working with a huge investment in Boston citizens made by the state's EOHHS agencies?
Well, you're talking about Felix Arroyo, Health and Human Services? Yeah. There definitely is an opportunity to work together. I mean, I think that there certainly is an opportunity to work with up at the state level. The new governor, incoming governor, he was in with the cabinet meeting the other day in my cabinet, and he had a chance to ask different questions of different cabinet members that were in there, and they got into little specifics about what we're working on with the state. You know, it really is the chief, Felix Arroyo, responsibility is to make sure that the cabinet, the departments that are under him have the supports they need and to stay connected to them. Some of those intertwine, some of those crossover agencies. Our Public Health Commission, as a lot of people know, Barbara Ferrer left, and she went to work for a foundation. So we're in the process now of we're doing a national search for a new director of public health. And our public health department really crosses a lot of lines with Health and Human Services on the state level. But some of our other departments, like Elderly Commission, falls under Felix Arroyo's camp here, and over in the state, it falls under a different area. So some of it crosses over, some of it doesn't cross over, but the cabinet really, we advocate for all the different programs. When it comes to the state, we advocate, everyone's kind of advocating for more money to the city of Boston. I don't know if that answers your question. Well, there is. There is, and there's also crossover. I mean, when you talk about somebody substance abuse, I mean, it falls under public health. If you're in the school department and you understand that you have a child and their parents might have a substance abuse problem, well, it's over in the school department. So there's a connection. We're working on how do we make better connections across agency lines. So, for example, we're working on the Office of Recovery Services, which is going to fall under public health. But that office will be able to cross over lines, go into education, go into economic development, wherever it might be. There has to be that constant conversation. It doesn't fall the same way the state does. It kind of is a little more across lines. For example, the Veteran Services. Part of Veteran Services is homelessness. That falls under Department of Neighborhood Development, arguably. Part of that is substance and alcohol abuse or PTSD, post-traumatic stress. That falls under public state health. You have senior citizens that, under the Elderly Commission, that might have problems with transportation. That falls under transportation. So it crosses over. You can't put it the same on the state as you are the city. We're a lot more closer to the people. So a lot of the people in the different department, the different groups of people we're working with in the city cross over a whole bunch of different departments. And that's why what I've tried to do is consolidate some of our departments so we don't have 64 different departments. We have less departments doing better work. Or fewer departments doing better work, maybe.
Mr. Mayor, Tom Palmer.
Hi, Tom.
Would you say a word like you did in your Labor Day speech about the role of labor in creating more housing and more affordable housing, please?
No, I think labor has a big role at the table here. I mean, I think that, first of all, there's an ability. One of the questions I'm trying to think. One of the questions is how do you, rather than giving tax incentives to create more housing, I forget where it is. Oh, can you please find an incentive other than tax breaks to entice companies and/or affordable housing developments to come to Boston? One way is by using labor's ability to have pots of money because of their investments and say, listen, we have pots of money here. And using labor's ability to invest, and labor wants to invest, they're investing in housing and infrastructure all across the country right now. Some of the pension funds and health and welfare funds. So that's one way of bringing in labor into the conversation. I think also when it comes to construction in Boston, a lot of the labor unions are looking, okay, is there a way we can do something with our rate to entice more development as well? And I think that's an important piece as well. We're having that conversation with labor as well. Also, having labor go to developers and contractors and say, we want you in this market. Because the housing market is not something that a lot of people are jumping into if the profit margin isn't as great as they want it to be. For example, around the housing that's going on around here now, when I say around here, the Seaport, the rate on return is a big investment. I mean, you're getting a good return on these condos because they're going for big money, or these townhouses. When you talk about workforce housing, the return on investment wasn't always there, the 6 or 7 or 8% that people wanted. So I think that labor can entice from bringing people to the table in that case.
This will be the last one.
And let me just say one other thing. The folks we're building the house for are people that work in labor. That's the middle class. People who earn between $45,000 and $100,000 a year. That's the group of people we're trying to target. So I think that's another way of keeping that middle class here. One last question? Well, 2 last questions. We'll do 2 last questions.
All right, I'll be quick. You outlined housing affordability as being key to the future of Boston, and with that, put forward an ambitious plan for 53,000 new units. How does your administration plan to approach the political puzzle of this ambitious citywide goal coupled with potential community pushback, say, to increase density and neighborhood change? In other words, where
I know what you're asking. Yeah. Well, in the Chamber of Commerce breakfast I had the other day, I actually talked about 2 growth zones. and two of those areas in Boston. One is on the Red Line between Andrews Station and Broadway Station on Dorchester Avenue. There's some businesses there now, and there's an opportunity for us to look at, it might not, the construction might not happen today, but over the course of the next 10, 15 years, look at zoning that, to change the zoning so when people come in now, and one of the ways of saving money is that somebody's going to come in and look at a piece of property and say, well, what can I put there? Well, it's already zoned for 300 units of housing. That just saves a lot of headaches, and people say, I'm ready to go in and buy. That saves money. Over the long term, that saves money because it's already pre-zoned. And the second growth zone is in Forest Hills and Jamaica Plain, going from Washington Street to Eggleston Square. Those two areas are important for us for a couple of reasons. One is because there's an opportunity for us to grow there. And the second, there's an opportunity to have a real robust community process to allow people saying that this is okay. Don't worry about it. Don't freak out that your neighborhood's changing, because in a lot of cases, neighborhoods are changing anyway, but they're not going to change that drastically. This is an opportunity for us to be able to build density on not a boulevard, but on an avenue with train stations between them. And I think what's happening in a lot of neighborhoods is that, for example, it's different than what happened in South Boston, where people were buying, flipping condos and 3-family houses, paying insane amounts of money for a condo on the second floor of a 3-family. I grew up in a 3-family. I still don't understand it today, because what happened on the second and third floor, we knew on the first floor, and what happened on the first floor, and then you have people, what happens when the market gets hot, people take a lot of land that might be 4,800 feet and say, okay, I want to put 8 condominiums on there, and over the years have been approved for 6. It's just changed the whole concept. This type of idea is a little different because you're talking pre-zoning and it's big, but it also allows you to keep people in the city.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope this is a good question to end on. I'm Catherine Lusk from the Boston University Initiative on Cities. And in our discussion today of policy research partnerships, I'm curious if you think that cities should have not just policy priorities, but research agendas, or if that should live at the city level as a master agenda, or at the cabinet level by a cabinet seat, or should it remain as it does today within individual departments?
No, I think that's a great, it's a lot in that question. Let me just tell you what we're doing in the city of Boston. We're looking at what type of city do we want to have by 2030. So we're preparing for 2030, meaning when we talk about infrastructure, housing, all those different initiatives. Part of that is, as we talk about policy, it's like the transportation question. We probably have in the city of Boston, realistically, $10, $12 billion worth of infrastructure improvements that we have to truly have the infrastructure that we want. Well, we have to set the policy for that now. We have to set the groundwork for that now to get where we want to get to by 2030. And I think that can be said for any level of city government. And I think it's important for that conversation to have, you mentioned a couple of different places. I think it's important to have the conversation all the different places. A few months ago, I brought in, I was down in New York City. I got a chance to tour Brooklyn. Pretty impressed with it. Love what they were doing there. I said, we got to do that here. Brought in the planners. I brought in some of the planners from the BRA, and I brought in the directors. And I said, I want the planners in the BRA to start thinking outside the box. What do you mean? I said, I want all the planners to start thinking, what do they vision Boston as? What do they vision their areas they're covering as? That's never been done before. It's always been given to them. This is what you're doing. This is how we want to do it, and this is how we're going to build it. I want the planners to start coming back to me and saying, this is what I would think Eggleston Square should look like, or this is what I think Dorchester Avenue should look like, or this is what I think that Dudley Square should look like, rather than coming from the mayor's office and a couple of developers, and this is what it's going to look like. I think we got to get more out of people, and more ideas out of people. Just like you're having conversations here today. If this conversation was run by Barry only, and Barry told you what was right, and no one else had a conversation, it's not a conversation. So for me as mayor, if I'm telling Brian Golden, and Brian Golding's telling his staff, this is how it happens to be, that's not growth in the city. And that's not how I operate, and that's not how the city of Boston is going to operate. And I think that having those conversations is okay. And I think the different ideas have to be throughout the whole organization. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Walsh. This is something of a bittersweet occasion for me. It is actually my last public event as director of the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston, which I have been distinctly honored to do for the past 10 years. And as I said earlier, it has been just a tremendous opportunity for me to learn. And I think that's what is so wonderful about relationships between the city and the university, is that there's just an opportunity to do what cities do best, which is to enable the exchange of ideas, to enable us to become better by leveraging the talents of those people around us. And just as you just learned from being around Mayor Walsh, it's just great to be part of this community that is Boston. With that in mind, I just want to thank the city, obviously, and who sent many great representatives here. I want to thank Jerry and Phyllis Rappaport, who gave me this opportunity to do this and were critically generous to make this event here. Our great partners at Barry, Robin, Chris, Liz Cohen, and of course, particularly, I want to thank the Polly O'Brien, Steve Poftak, and David Lubroff, who were such terrific partners with me at the Rappaport Institute. And thank you all very much for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to Rob Sampson.
Thanks, Ed. If you hadn't said it, I was going to say something about you stepping down, and what a great job you did, and good luck to Jeff Lieben taking over. So it's the end of a long day. I want to be quick here. I know I stand between you and the poster session and drinks and so forth, but I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, my name is Rob Sampson, director of the Boston Area Research Initiative, also professor in the social sciences at Harvard. And, I'm an academic at heart, and I've mostly done basic research in my career, but the experience of working with the various partners that are represented today and the experience of BARI has really been tremendous. And to be honest, at the end of the day, I'm even more inspired by the unifying vision that's been realized. And if you think about it, at least from where I sit, everywhere we go, or everything that we're told, is that there's divisions, right? I mean, it's gotten to the point where I used to watch, while eating dinner, my wife and I used to watch these, it's not called point counterpoint anymore, but whatever these discussions allegedly are on the news, but it's really not. They're not discussions. It's people just shouting at one another for the most part. And I think today, from a really deep perspective, we've seen coming together various different constituencies, government, private foundations, nonprofits, academics, the city, the mayor, I mean, you name it. And it's been, I think, really remarkable. And then it's been reflected in various specific substantive areas, whether it be safety, whether it be education, economic development, or the data ecosystem. And then also in the lunches. And for example, on the table that I was leading, really interesting ideas came up. One which converges with what was one of the topics that just came up, which is the need for more regional perspectives, right? Well, we may have data on one place like Boston, but what about interlocking that with other communities? It's a very difficult problem. So I think it's been a very inspiring day. That's basically, I think, a terrific outcome. I just want to mention, Ed has made a few thank yous, and I want to just acknowledge a few more. First of all, the event has been sponsored and organized by BARI, Boston Area Research Initiative, the City of Boston, and the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston, which in itself is an interesting collaboration, right? Because that is crossing what is often seen as different constituencies. BARI located at Harvard and Rappaport. But Rappaport, traditionally concerned with governance, the city, politicians and government agencies, Harvard often viewed as egghead professors. But I think you've seen an interesting collaboration here today. I'd like to acknowledge major funding. These kinds of events don't just happen. Major funding was provided by the Boston Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, who has, I would mention, a deep interest in city-university partnerships and has funded us along with a few other cities. The National Science Foundation, and part of what we're doing with our support there is trying to catalyze a new urban science, and you saw some of that in the data ecosystem approach. The Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and I'd like to thank Liz Cohen again as Dean. This entity had its start a few years ago, and it was kind of risky and a bit unusual for Radcliffe, and I think that Liz was wise to see it through, if you will, and as it sprouts new different kinds of programs. And also the Cracker Jack team that helps organize this. I can't go through everyone's names. The Rappaport Foundation and Phyllis and Jerry are here today, and we thank them as well, and again, the partnerships that have gone on. We also have additional support from the Initiative on Cities at Boston University, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the NU Lab, Northeastern College of Computer and Information Science, the College of Sciences, Social Sciences and Humanities at NU, and the Taubman Center for State and Local Government at the Harvard Kennedy School. So, just reading off that list again indicates the level of cooperation that went into this, and we hope continues. And so finally, just thanks to you, the audience, the public, which is diverse in its own right, for coming and for engaging very seriously throughout the day. It's been terrific. Thank you for coming, and we hope the spirit carries forward. Thank you.